Now we can get started. Thank you again for taking the time today to learn more about the County of San Diego's Housing Blueprint. My name is Amanda Wagner, and I am a senior associate at LaSAR, which is part of the consultant team brought on by the County of San Diego to support the Housing Blueprint process. I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues who will be helping answer questions throughout regarding this process. I'll let them introduce themselves at the question and answer portion as they answer questions. So for some brief background on the blueprint, the County of San Diego is committed to curbing the housing affordability crisis. And to help in this effort, they want to create a roadmap or blueprint that will guide their ongoing response. This blueprint will have goals, objectives, strategies, and short, medium, and long-term recommendations to address the housing crisis. And it will ultimately guide the county's policies, programs, and even its organizational structure. In today's presentation, I'm going to give a brief overview of the county's housing scope and the blueprint process. Everyone who is a participant, at the end of the presentation, there'll be a brief opportunity drawing, and there'll be plenty of time for your questions and answers. So while, the housing crisis is not new, the blueprint is relatively new, and today's meeting is not going to be the first or last engagement opportunity. We wanted to make sure that people had a clear sense of what's happened to date and what are the upcoming opportunities for engagement. So here's a map of San Diego with which you might be familiar. It includes the 5 districts for the Board of Supervisors and the 18 cities in the unincorporated area. The mostly rural unincorporated area is home to about 500,000 people living in 175,000 homes. I'm going to talk briefly about the county's housing scope or authority. So starting with land use, or the ability to develop housing, the county has land use authority only in the unincorporated areas of the county. So again, that's everywhere outside of the limits of the 18 cities pictured here. Housing projects that are built in any of the 18 cities must be approved by the governments of those cities. So that's developing housing. In terms of funding affordable housing projects, while the county has housing funds that can be used anywhere in the county, some funds are limited to the unincorporated area or to certain cities. The county also administers about 10,000 housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8, that can be used in 13 cities and the unincorporated area. The county's vouchers cannot be used in San Diego, Ocean City, Carlsbad, Encinitas, and National City because they have their own voucher allocations. That's, developing housing and funding affordable housing. In terms of social services, the county generally funds various social services throughout the county. This includes many services that are available to people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. The lead homelessness agency is the Regional Task Force for Homelessness that coordinates closely with the county on services, funding, and governance. So I'm going to share a video that the county created. It's a 2-minute video that gives a great overview of the blueprint's purpose and need.
The County of San Diego is committed to curbing the housing affordability crisis, and we need your input to develop a blueprint for solutions. For decades, home building has not kept pace with our growing population and demand for housing at nearly all income levels. This has caused housing costs to skyrocket in the county. Close to 20% of San Diegans are spending over 50% of their income on housing, contributing to rising levels of displacements, overcrowding, and homelessness, especially for vulnerable populations like seniors. The county is committed to solutions. Since 2019, the Board of Supervisors has established multiple initiatives to stimulate housing production and improve access to homes for the most vulnerable. From new land use policies for the unincorporated county to new housing development and resource programs throughout the region, the county is dedicating resources and leveraging funding to get people housed. and to ensure that new housing is created in places where residents can thrive and impacts to the environment are reduced. While many of the board's directives have been completed, others are in progress and subject to changes in policy, priorities, and regulatory requirements. Moving forward, we need a guiding tool to help maximize resources, balance priorities, and direct efforts. As a first step, the board approved an initial draft housing blueprint in December of 2022. The draft blueprint lays out the goals, objectives, and strategies to meet housing needs with a focus on our core values: integrity, belonging, excellence, access, sustainability, and equity. It reflects prior community input, specific regional priorities, direction from the Board of Supervisors, as well as state mandates. As we refine the blueprint, your feedback is important to ensure that any new factors in the changing housing landscape are considered. Thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing from you.
So this website is also a link to the Engage San Diego website that we'll make sure we have in the chat as well, because that is where we'll keep sharing all of the information as this process moves forward. So as the video explained, the housing affordability crisis is contributing to rising levels of displacement, overcrowding, and homelessness. And the Board of Supervisors recognizes that. And as I mentioned, housing is not a new issue or priority. Since 2019, the board has adopted over 20 initiatives related to housing. And again, that's thinking back on the county's authority over land use and resources and housing development and what they can and can't impact, and how they can collaborate with other stakeholders. And then in the end of 2022, there was a Let's Talk Housing workshop, which directed the county to create this blueprint. And the process is going through the summer of 2024, when hopefully the Board of Supervisors will approve a final blueprint. Starting in August of 2023, the county brought on LaSalle Development Consultants and their consultant team to take a deep dive into what's already the feedback and draft that's already happened, and then do an additional assessment and refinement and engagement as they're finalizing the blueprint next summer. Again, this is the timeline. The end of 2022, there was direction. January through August, there was some engagement by the county that folks on this call or webinar may have already engaged in. If you haven't, that's also fine. That included community surveys, virtual community meetings, and presentations to share a draft of the blueprint. And as I mentioned, we're in this assessment, engagement, and finalizing phase. On the screen, I know it's small and the purpose is not for you to read all of these. It's just to give you a sense of the two-page draft blueprint that the county does have currently. It is also available for download on the Engage San Diego website, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what's in the current draft. And it's 5 overarching goals, and then there are various objectives and priorities. And this will be fleshed out through feedback from conversations that are ongoing over the next few months. So there are these 5 goals that are based around the 5 Ps from SANDAG. So I'm just going to read them briefly. Produce housing for all, promote equity, inclusion, and sustainability, preserve vulnerable housing, prevent displacement, and protect tenants. In addition to these 5 goals, as I mentioned, there are 8 objectives. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but I just wanted to sort of explain to you how it is currently formatted. These are 4 of the 8 draft objectives that are in the 2-pager. And again, they were informed by direction from the board, mandates from the state, and input from the community across all of the county's current housing efforts. The 8 objectives are here. And they have spanned 5 topics. So that goes with mandates, as I mentioned, sustainability, funding and partnerships, and thinking about amenities and location of housing, and what are the factors that you might want to think about when making those decisions. So the initial community feedback from the county's activities in the spring were around a couple different topics. So there was feedback around what community members liked and what is missing from the draft goals. So that included things like, making sure there is representation from different populations. How do we think about um, landlord and tenant rights? How do we think about housing production barriers and reducing them and the regulations that go into them? There was feedback around what is missing from the objectives, around opportunities and barriers to implement the objectives, and then overall need for information and clarity. So all details around the themes emerging from these is also available in the community feedback findings, but importantly, the feedback that the county received was informing the scope of work that we as LaSAR and our consultant team have been undergoing for the last few months. Specifically, we've been doing a deep assessment of the county's housing landscape. So looking at the programs and creating an inventory of county programs that are adjacent to housing or touch on housing, and making sure that we're clear on what the county is already doing and what's working well and what are some potential opportunities there. Looking at organizational structure for housing policy programs and processes. Looking at what are the case studies for best practices from other places that the county might want to learn from, assessing key housing data, and conducting focus groups. For example, we've also talked to over 14 different agencies, departments, and offices that touch on housing. So all of the above is going to be informing a refined blueprint that will be coming out in the coming months of the new year, that will be able to have feedback from folks like yourself and your networks and communities to make sure that we're giving opportunities for input, but also informed by things that are already out there and information that's already out there. So this is a couple opportunities for engagement. There's the Engage San Diego website, as I mentioned. There were the focus groups that we've conducted. And then January, February, March, there's going to be surveys, pop-ups at existing events, and stakeholder and regional forums that we're going to be conducting that will dive deeper into certain housing topics and issues. And then there's going to be a community engagement report that's going to be shared in April. But as I mentioned, the ultimate final blueprint itself would be available in the summer. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm also going to put up the poll for the opportunity drawing. So this poll has, oh, I'm sorry, it's the wrong one. This poll you should be seeing on your screen, and will be interpreted in Spanish, has 3 questions. Are you an employee of the county or the consultant team? Your preferred name and your preferred contact information. So your email or phone number to be contacted if your name is drawn. And the name we'll select will get a gift card for those that are participating live. So I'll give a second for that, and then I'm going to take down my screen share and allow questions from all of you. And give it a couple minutes. So do any of our attendees have questions? Again, you can either raise your hand or you can put a question into the Q&A. Seeing John, I'm going to turn your audio on if you would like to ask your question. You should be able to.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Amanda, can you tell us more about Section 8? Yeah, that I've heard about that over the years, but I really don't have much of a history about that.
Sure. Do any of my fellow panelists want to answer that? Craig, go ahead.
John, hi, I'm Craig Edelman. I'm a senior principal at Lessard Development Consultants, and we are the lead consulting entity on the Blueprint work and a sister company to Lessard Support Services. Great to be with you. Thanks for the question, John. Section 8 is also known as Housing Choice Vouchers, and it is a key resource when it comes to housing affordability. That resource is controlled and limited by the federal government. So Section 8 certificate or housing choice voucher certificate availability is doled out, if you will, by HUD on a limited basis, and certainly are in high demand nationally and significantly undersupplied to the need. So we start with that as the landscape. What is also helpful to know is that Section 8 is administered by housing authorities, and the County of San Diego does have its own housing authority, which primarily serves the unincorporated county, and anyone else can feel free to help me, but I believe there are a couple of incorporated jurisdictions also, could be a couple or more, that fall under the purview of the county housing authority. So noting that across the county, most of the the Section 8 supply is actually controlled by San Diego Housing Commission, which is its own housing authority entity for the city, and I believe also contracts with or worked under an operating agreement with other incorporated jurisdictions. So we have, as part of this work, looked at the work and the structure of the county's housing authority. We are assessing how to best utilize Section 8 as a resource. I will really quickly explain that Section 8s can either be project-based, which means they are tied to a specific housing unit, and that is a useful tool in the development or production of new housing, because that housing itself, the bricks and mortar, if you will, can rely on that stream of Section 8 income over an extended period of time and therefore finance against it. And Section 8 also comes in a tenant-based variety, which means that the certificate is tied to the household and not the housing unit. And those are very useful to provide portability, what we call, or mobility in one's housing choices. As a household, I could have a Section 8 certificate that is tenant-based and take that to a variety of different housing options. So we are thinking about the amount of Section 8 certificates that are project-based and therefore utilized both to subsidize household affordability, but also simultaneously can be used to further production. And then also administratively, how the county's housing authority is functioning, how effectively that is, and whether there are some potential additional strategies to derive more out of what is, again, a critical resource in Section 8.
Did that answer your question, John? Do you follow up
Yeah,
questions from that?
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, it did. I've also heard that Section 8, for the most part, it's an overmax system, i.e. if you wanted to get, if you had a family that wanted to get on Section 8, it might take 2 or 3 years to get the voucher. I mean, does it affect whether they work or it doesn't work, or that's I was curious about that.
To talk more about that as well. We could talk for a long time about the benefits and challenges of Section 8, but directly to your follow-up question, absolutely. I think 2 to 3 years. I apologize because I don't recall the size or duration, typical duration of the county's waiting lists, but 2 to 3 years tends to be quite aggressive. There are, stories across the state and the country of waits in excess of 10 years, et cetera, not being uncommon. So I think the main point, which I tried to touch on in the first answer, is that the program is significantly oversubscribed. There aren't nearly enough Section 8s available to serve the need, or certainly nowhere near the number of Section 8s to meet the number of households that are eligible for Section 8s. And so it is not an entitlement type program. And so indeed, that is one major shortfall. Is it something of a those Section 8s typically are not available on demand unless there are emergency circumstances, or there is sometimes, for instance, disaster relief, or through COVID, we saw some additional Section 8s available specifically for those emergency circumstances. But in typical practice, number one, they are not available in sufficient enough supply to help the significant amount of the population that is housing cost burdened or homeless. And number two, we also have a challenge in terms of housing that accepts Section 8s. So if you have a Section 8 certificate that is tenant-based, therefore not tied to a specific unit, you are oftentimes in San Diego County, this is the case, you can't expect that every landlord is going to accept that Section 8 certificate. And in fact, with such a strong housing market and other options for landlords, it's fairly common for them not to accept them. And so that further narrows the number of housing options available. And households with Section 8 certificates have historically experienced a significant amount of challenge in terms of just finding units, finding homes at which they can apply their Section 8 certificate.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's exactly, we know there can be a lot of jargon or a lot of need for clarity of information. So exactly the sort of, questions we are hoping to help shed some light on. Anybody else have any questions about the process or about, what's coming up or any of the content? Anyone else joining? Want to ask? We're also open if people have suggestions for other places where we should be sharing this information as well in the new year. We're happy to hear that. It doesn't just have to be a question if you have any comments as well. Yes, John, I am trying to allow you to speak again verbally.
I got you. I'll talk to I'm the chair of the sponsor group out here in Borrego Springs. We've got a meeting coming up on January the 4th. I can talk with them. We're going to be briefing them in regard to your plan and things like this. And I'll ask them if they would like to have a summary from you guys. We could have that as agenda item that we could cover it for our community that's more specific to our particular issues out here, of which we could do it also on Zoom. So you guys don't have to come out here because it is a bit of a drive. So we could follow up on that and see if we have an interest out here in the terms of following up that with the local community.
That sounds great. Thanks, John. And I'm going to put in the chat, which I think everyone will be able to see once I put it, my email, if people have additional questions or follow up after this as well. It's amanda@lasarsupport.co. I'll put that, and I'm going to put the link. Assuming people were able to find this webinar, you already are familiar with the Engage San Diego website, but I'm putting the link there. And on the right-hand side of that page is a direct link to the draft housing blueprint, as I mentioned, previous meetings and materials, some definitions, and all of that information is available there, and we'll be updating it as we go. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. And again, feel free to reach out if you have follow-up thoughts, and we will contacting the opportunity drawing winner in the next day or so. So thank you all.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Take care.